On the 15th of November 2018, Sophie Howe, then Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, appeared before the Finance Committee in the Senedd. Howe referred to gender as being a protected characteristic under the Equality Act.
Well, Centre for Public Policy, they are doing some work specifically around the gender review to look at impact assessments on gender. So Dr. Alison Parkin is doing that work, and we're working quite closely with her. That would enable us to look at where sort of gender could fit and what that deeper dive in terms of gender and then potentially the other protected characteristics could look like.
Gender is not a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. Sex is a protected characteristic, but as was made clear at a Wales Centre for Public Policy seminar that very same day that was attended by Dr. Alison Parkin and was documented by Susanna Nessum on the Wales Centre for Public Policy website in December 2018, the Welsh Government has chosen to define gender as how sex bodies are lived, represented and regulated. Gender is therefore a broad concept encompassing gender as identity and as expression, gender in language and media, and gender in socio-cultural norms and in law. The Welsh Government has chosen to define gender as not a synonym for sex. If Sophie Howe was really working closely with Alison Parkin, then she was intentionally misleading in the same way that Professor Emma Reynolds was intentionally misleading when she claimed in the agenda resource provided for all primary schools in Wales that gender and gender identity were both protected characteristics under the Equality Act. The agenda resource has been recommended for use in schools by the former Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. Susanna Nessum's article continues. Following this event, the Gender Equality Review's advisory group met to discuss what gender equality and a feminist government is in the Welsh context. This will inform the Gender Equality Review's roadmap to advance gender equality in Wales, set to be released in July 2019. The Wales Centre for Public Policy will also continue working on the Gender Equality Review over the coming months. In April 2019, at the Welsh Labour Party conference in Llandudno, Oxfam Cymru and the Women's Equality Network Wales launched Wales's first Feminist Scorecard. As it states in an article on the Institute for Welsh Affairs website written by former head of Oxfam Cymru, Rachel Cable, the scorecard illustrates the Welsh Government's initial strides towards becoming a feminist government and in shaping Wales towards becoming a feminist nation. But there is still a long way to go. The scorecard, tracking Welsh Government's progress towards gender equality across 6 areas of policy, shows what could be done now to progress this agenda. The Feminist Scorecard was published just over a year after the then First Minister Carwyn Jones set out his ambitions to lead a feminist government. The first step on this journey was for the Welsh Government to commission a gender review, which is ongoing. In parallel to the gender review, Oxfam Cymru and Women Equality Network Wales joined forces to develop the scorecard. The article stated, Oxfam Cymru stands ready to work with Welsh Government to advance women's rights in Wales and across the globe. The current wave of feminism is very influenced by Judith Butler, who in turn has been influenced by Marxist critical theory. As she explains in an interview with Cardiff University professor Alessandra Tanassini, published in the Women's Philosophy Review in 1998, Celia Ben-Habib and I were very interested in Hegel, in German idealism and in Marxism. We worked together, I think, mainly on the topic of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, so we started with common ground. While I became more interested in French philosophy, she became more interested in the Habitnation project. The Marxist influence on queer theory can be seen in the narrative of power and oppression. Binary oppositions are inherently hierarchical, with one pole of the binary oppressing the other. So women are the oppressed and men are the oppressors. This mindset is exemplified in an open letter to Mark Drakeford published by Women's Equality Network Wales in March 2021. The letter stated, "Educational settings pose an important opportunity to tackle the age-old narrative that boys will be boys. For too long, men have evaded responsibility for the harm and abuse they inflict upon women. Issues such as domestic, sexual and physical abuse are often discussed as women's issues. This is a distortion of the truth. These are men's issues which impact upon women. Working with women's organisations, the Welsh Government must reshape this account and centre the focus instead on men and boys and how they can best go about changing their behaviour." The letter continues, "In school settings, it is crucial that boys are alerted to the existence of misogyny and the structural barriers facing women in society. It is crucial that relationships and sex education adopts a more holistic understanding of the complexity of relationships in 21st century Wales. This means understanding different forms of sexual manipulation, harassment and assault, as well as the role of technology in young people's lives. Safety within RSE should also take into account issues of consent, abuse and mental well-being. An integral part of this is understanding sexual coercion, toxic masculinity, conditional consent, and the institutional inequalities and power dynamics facing women in society today. All men bear the responsibility to call out misogyny and sexist behaviour, and education and bystander training pose the opportunity to give them the tools to do so." Signatories of the letter included Catherine Fuchs, Director of Women Equality Networks Wales, Cerys Furlong, Chief Executive Officer, Chwarae Teg, Rocio Cifuentes, the current Children's Commissioner for Wales, Davinia Louise Green, Director of Stonewall Cymru, Rachel Cable, Head of Oxfam Pride, Sophie Howe, Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, Professor Reynolds from Cardiff University, Dr. Alison Parkin, University Lecturer and Research and Policy Consultant. In June 2022, Rita Broberg from the Centre for Social Justice had an article published titled, "Why are Men Often Overlooked as Victims of Domestic Abuse?" Domestic abuse is routinely portrayed as a gendered crime perpetrated by men against women. Yet the startling truth is that 1/3 of domestic abuse victims are men. The Office for National Statistics estimates that 1.6 million women and 757,000 men reported abuse in 2020. Despite representing such a significant proportion of victims, men are silenced by the hostility and incredulity they encounter when opening up about their experiences to the police and safeguarding services. Support agencies often fail to recognise the abuse of men and overlook cases involving female abusers. The abuse of men does not fit the queer theory, power and oppression narrative, and so feminists ignore it. To overcome the male dominance of women, queer theorists believe that gender stereotypes need to be challenged by redefining the words man and woman, so rather than referring to sex categories, they instead refer to two of many gender identities. As Dr. Alison Parkin writes, postmodernist feminism's queer and trans theories have argued that on the way to creating a level playing field, the gender binary should be challenged, disrupted, and the fluidity of gender identities recognised. These new categories of people between men and women are known generically as non-binary people and comprise, in the main, effeminate men and masculine women.
There's a whole variety of experiences that people have that cause them to question, like, hey, maybe I don't actually fit into the definition of, man or woman, and that there's something else.
am Danny, and I identify as non-binary.
I'm Lindsay, and I identify as non-binary.
My name is Fang. I identify as non-gendered person.
I'm Francois. I identify as genderqueer.
My name is James, and I identify as non-binary.
Non-binary is someone whose gender doesn't fall within the context of the binary that we set up in society.
I am not male, I'm not female, I'm somewhere floating around in there.
Non-binary means acknowledging a wider range of experience.
For me, it means that I'm not identified with any specific gender, like male, female, or other things.
It's part of a larger kind of goal of questioning these assumptions about gender and questioning why there only need to be two.
It gives me the freedom to express myself. If I wake up one day and I want to spike my hair and do punk rock makeup, I can do it.
Every couple of decades, some designer decides that men's shorts are, suddenly 5 inches shorter or 5 inches longer. In the 70s, if you look at what men were wearing, they were like Rockettes, like shorts were up to here, and now it's like get it, down to the knee. Non-binary is freedom from that whole game. It's like I don't care what the men's department at Marshall's suddenly has decided that like men need to wear. I'm gonna go for what makes me feel more authentic.
I tend to say gender is dependent on context and point of view.
To me, it just makes me comfortable that I can just be this body that I have.
Some of those masculine girls go on to have their breasts removed. Oxfam have massively bought into queer theory and have produced a language guide to be used by staff. In the overview, they refer to Derrida's idea that speech and text can be deconstructed and so modified for political purposes. They state, language has the power to reinforce or deconstruct systems of power that maintain poverty, inequality and suffering. As we are making commitments to decolonization in practice, it is important that we do not forget the role of language in communications in the context of inequality. The Inclusive Language Guide is a resource to support people in our sector who have to communicate in English to think about how the way they write can subvert or inadvertently reinforce intersecting forms of inequality that we work to end. The language recommended is drawn from specialist organisations which provide advice on language preferred by marginalised people, groups and communities, and by our own staff and networks, to support us to make choices that respectfully reflect the way they wish to be referred to. We want to support everyone to feel empowered, to be inclusive in their work, because equality isn't equality if it isn't for everyone. The guide states, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. No one, whether cisgender or transgender, gets to choose what sex they're assigned at birth. This term is preferred to biological male-female, male-female bodied, natal male-female, and born male-female, which are inaccurate and do not respect the identity of transgender people. Cis. A person whose sense of gender identity correlates with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Previously, there was no recognition that concurrence of sex and gender roles is anything other than the norm. Cis or cisgender is a term to describe people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. If used, this term should be framed in the context of power. Cisnormative. The practices and institutions that legitimize and privilege those who are comfortable in the gender associated with the sex assigned to them at birth. Previously, there was no recognition that concurrence of sex and gender identity can be considered a privilege. This norm disadvantages and marginalizes people whose gender identity and expression do not meet social expectations. We need to respect the realities of all people and be aware of forms of structural discrimination, including against trans people. Those women who push back against this manipulation of language are known as gender-critical feminists, or TERFs, and are routinely accused by those who are very influential with the Welsh Government of being motivated by hate. One of the most prominent of these is J.K. Rowling, who in 2020 wrote an article explaining her reasons for speaking out. She wrote, "If you didn't know already, TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. In practice, a huge number and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women. But accusations of TERFery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions and organisations I once admired, who are cowering before the tactics of the playground. They'll call us transphobic. They'll say I hate trans people. What next? They'll say you've got fleas. Speaking as a biological woman, a lot of people in positions of power really need to grow a pair. Huge numbers of women are justifiably terrified by the trans activists. I know this because so many have got in touch with me to tell me their stories. They're afraid of doxing, of losing their jobs or their livelihoods, and of violence. But endlessly unpleasant as its constant targeting of me has been, I refuse to bow down to a movement that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode women as a political and biological class and offering cover to predators like few before it. I stand alongside the brave women and men, gay, straight and trans, who are standing up for freedom of speech and thought and for the rights and safety of some of the most vulnerable in our society. Young gay kids, fragile teenagers and women who are reliant on and wish to retain their single-sex spaces. Polls show that those women are in the vast majority and exclude only those privileged or lucky enough never to have come up against male violence or sexual assault, and who've never troubled to educate themselves on how prevalent it is. In June 2023, Oxfam released a video for Pride Month.
How are you marking Pride Month this year? While LGBTQIA plus people around the world are deprived of basic safety, not protected by laws, preyed on by hate groups online and offline, discriminated against at work, deprived of opportunities, and pushed to the margins. But pride can be found, etched deeply in the hand of a friend, the hug of a chosen family member, or the safe spaces of a kind community. This Pride Month, we take pride in those who protect and champion safety for LGBTQIA plus people. We all must stand together with queer folks, online, at work, in schools, in sport, through laws, everywhere. We call to protect the pride. Are you with us?
Some thought the woman with the TERF badge was very reminiscent of J.K. Rowling. India, formerly known as Jonathan Willoughby, is a trans-identified male and trans activist who has fathered a child. He insists that he is a real woman.
Woman, okay?
I agree with that.
Not
and
a he,
respect that.
a she,
Nobody's
a woman,
questioning
okay?
that.
I'm a real woman, Amanda. I want you to know that.
Yes,
a
darling.
real woman, okay? I'm
Yes.
glad that's sinking in. I'm going to say it one more time so it really penetrates.
Yes.
I am a real woman, okay?
He has been highly critical of people who are critical of gender and uses language that, if used by a man who didn't identify as trans, would undoubtedly be described as homophobic and misogynist. But in the queer theory mindset, where one pole of a binary oppresses the other, trans are the victims and cis are the oppressors. One tweet of Willoughby's was verging on the racist. Another threatened kidnapping. He harbours a particular animus toward J.K. Rowling. Although he is quite happy to misgender other trans-identified males, and even wish death on them, he takes great offence if anybody misgenders him.
J.K. Rowling has definitely committed a crime. I'm legally a woman, she knows I'm a woman, and she calls me a man.
I will keep talking about J.K. Rowling as long as she keeps talking about me and my community.
Neutral observers may see India Willoughby as a deeply unpleasant misogynist, but he claims to be a woman, and the Welsh Government are adamant.
From the toxicity of Twitter to so-called populist politics and a media narrative designed to pitch people against one another, we recommit ourselves to supporting trans and non-binary people, and our starting point is that trans men are men, trans women are women, and non-binary identities are valid.
It is plain where Welsh Government sympathies lie.